swings. There we go. Welcome everybody to the grand finale of our Conversation Piece lecture series. We've had a really good time this year. We've brought Aya de Leon, Sister Helen Prejean, Dr. Ronald Takaki, Dr. Cornel West, Luong Ung, Dr. Greg Saris, and our featured speaker for tonight, Luis Rodrigues. It's been a great time, and there's a lot more to come, so stay with us. My name is Darius Spearman. I'm the Intercultural Center Coordinator. There's a bunch of people I would like to thank. We are part of the Sonoma Student Union, which is located kind of across from the main quad, so do pay us a visit there. Tonight's lecture is part of Rasa Native American Heritage Month, and we've got a lot of things going on for Rasa Month, including the Chicano Youth Leadership Conference, which will be taking place here tomorrow, and I want to give a big thanks to Mecha for organizing that. I understand they have over 300 local students registered for this conference tomorrow. So congratulations, Mecha, on a very, very good job. I also want to thank Mecha for covering for me tonight, or shall I say enabling me to stretch myself really thin. I just drove in from San Jose, where I attended a conference of the California Council of Cultural Centers in Higher Education. I am a proud member. We're a group that's doing a lot of good work. So thank you, Mecha, for covering for me tonight and hosting tonight's speaker, Mr. Rodrigues, and taking really good care of him. I have a couple quick announcements and some thank yous, and we'll get to our group exercise. I want to thank our sponsors, Student Union, Associated Students, and instructionally related activities for making this entire series possible. We also have, as part of Rasa Native American Heritage Month, the Ballet Folklorico Night, which will be taking place Saturday, May 7th, in the Warren Auditorium. That's going to feature some local Ballet Folklorico groups. So do check, and tickets are available in the Student Union for that as well. So onward to our group activity. So some of you have done this with me before. Let's take out our cell phones. Let me see those beautiful cell phones. I know there's more people around here with cell phones. Hold them up high. Look at all those cell phones. All right. Now let's do this together, folks. Hit that power button. There we go. Makes a beautiful little tone. And now, to introduce tonight's speaker, I give you Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, Chair of Chicano and Latino Studies.
Gracias. ¿Hay gente que habla español aquí? ¡Híjole! Estupendo. Well, maybe we'll do it bilingual. It's wonderful to see all of these, see if I can figure out where to stand, to see all of these beautiful smiling faces de muchos colores muy bonitos, ¿sí? Aplauso a todos por estar aquí presentes. For all of the wonderful young people in the audience, and young at heart also, I think that you may not realize it, but our wonderful speaker tonight, Luis Rodrigues, is very much like every one of us in this room in terms of going about his life and thinking about what he might do later on in life. And this, what he went through in his life is reflected in his books. and serves as a wonderful, it's not so much each of his books, whether it's poetry, children's books, and he's now doing short stories and a novel coming out in 2 weeks. Each of those have a way of showing us how we go about life. And sometimes when we're still young in life, it can help to show us that what we're feeling deep inside, even though sometimes we're fearful about it, that it's okay and it's good and it's going to take us somewhere super. So remember that as you pick up several of his books here tonight, which are being sold in back. And Luis Rodrigues, after his talk, will be here for a good half hour, a session to do some autograph signing. Luis Javier Rodrigues was born in El Paso, Texas, but he then immediately went to Ciudad Juarez, where he spent the first 2 years of his life. When he was about 2 years old, his family moved to Watts, moved to California, and then when he was about 8, to the San Gabriel Valley in East LA, where he continued growing up. He acknowledges that in a perhaps misguided effort to find friends and achieve a sense of empowerment, sound familiar? He started joining gangs in East LA. He started doing this when he was 11 years old. He was also very shy. Sometimes when I tell students I was shy when I was young, they laugh, they don't believe me. But most of the time when we're starting out, when we're growing up, we're very shy. He was shy. He found a way out of that shyness by joining groups which later moved into activism. And sometimes that's one of the best ways to get out of our shyness, is to be involved with groups who might feel the same way we do, or we might find purpose to what has been rumbling around inside us. He not only found meaning in activism, he found refuge in books. At age 13, he participated in the school walkouts in LA. You've heard of the school walkouts that occurred in 1968, before some of you were born, but they have great significance to our present. These were to protest the prejudice in the educational system. Then in 1970, when he was barely 16, he participated in the Chicano moratorium, which was primarily protesting our involvement in the Vietnam War. In and out of high school, dropping in, dropping out, going back in, back and forth, he began writing verses. And he states, I have a quote here, that I would go inside and hide myself in books and not have to worry about the yelling and screaming and bullets flying. There is a lot that we can learn by finding refuge in books. In 1972, when he was about 18, he won his first poetry award, the Quinto Sol Literary Award, which gave him $250 and a trip to Berkeley. He, because of his involvement in the Chicano moratorium, he was arrested, he was incarcerated. Thanks to community people standing up for him out there, his sentence was reduced. But after incarceration, he returned to school. He finished high school, and during the 1970s, he worked as a truck driver, a carpenter, a steel worker, furnace operator, a refinery mechanic, while also taking night school classes. In 1980, he became a journalist and a newspaper photographer. I was asking him about this earlier tonight, and he said that he was, I think he stated that he was able to, but sometimes we have these shining stars out there somewhere hidden in our neighborhoods, and fortunately the spirits guide them to this special moment. He participated in an 11-week workshop school session during the summer in 1980 at Berkeley for minority journalists. And once he had completed that and his natural talent came out for writing, he found his first newspaper job. And I believe that was at the San Bernardino Sun, where he continued to work for 2 years. And San Bernardino, I think he'll tell us a little more about it, was a really rough area. He had, I'm sure, very interesting things to cover as a newspaper reporter. But after 2 years, he became blacklisted. He was blacklisted by the editor of that newspaper, which affected, you know, top editors all sticking together, and it affected his being able to get a job as a journalist in the future. But during the 1980s, he also had, after this he had a public affairs job, and he was director of the Los Angeles Latino Writers Association, and he also published a Latino literary and art magazine for budding writers, which he called Chisme Arte. Chisme Arte, or Chisme Arte. And that helped a lot of budding writers get started. Luis Rodrigues had discovered the power of words, and he has a marvelous facility for the written word and for publishing books. Before I cite his books, in 1984, he is often identified with Chicago because in 1984 he moved to Chicago to become editor of the People's Tribune, a weekly revolutionary publication with ties to community-based struggles and action. Here in Chicago, he began conducting poetry workshops, teaching poetry workshops in shelters for the homeless, among gang members, in prisons, in migrant camps, and he founded a publishing house, Tia Chucha Press, which has now moved to California. He has published freelance articles in several newspapers and magazines, all of national prominence. For example, The Nation, Los Angeles Times, Philadelphia Inquirer Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, the Utne Reader, the Los Angeles Weekly, the Chicago Reporter, and Poets and Writers. In poetry, he's noted for his sharp images and for tonal changes that take writers on an emotional roller coaster. He often depicts the dehumanized urban experience at its worst. But there's also a beautiful sensitivity in his poetry. Some of his poems are about love, some are about children, about transitions that we make in life. He has published, he published books of poetry in 1989 and 1991, followed by the book that made him infamous, which is of course titled Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA, which was published in 93, and then in various school boards in the states of Texas, Michigan, Illinois, and most notably in California, his book was banned. His book has continued to be banned. I forget if it was 1996 or 97, the Sonoma County School Board banned his book. But what I want to say to you is that he is in very good company. The 100 top most banned books include writers like, I'm sure some of you know, J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, a little more recently, Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, I think all of Toni Morrison's books, Alice Walker's The Color Purple. So I think having your book banned is a very major tribute for a writer. And to finalize here, I want you to know he has won all kinds of awards for poetry. I'm sure I could never cite all of them. He's also received fellowships, grants, and other public recognitions in and outside of the United States. He travels frequently. His first book received the Carl Sandburg Literary Award for Nonfiction, the Chicago Sun-Times Book Award for Nonfiction, and it was called Notable Book of the Year by the New York Times Book Review, despite its banning. He has also published an additional book of poetry, and I think he will have a new one coming out in the fall. And then he's moved into other genres. He recently published a CD, which maybe he'll tell us a little more about, which includes music and poetry by himself and someone else. And hopefully there'll be more of that. He has also published 2 children's books which demonstrate the power of words as well as intelligence that we acquire from our youth through observation. And I don't have the other book up here, and this is, the book they have back there is in English. I've got the Spanish translation. But in this book, La Llaman America, I think in English she is called America, This is a girl's name. Her name is America, which is a common name in Spanish. This book, and it seems to be based in Chicago, has a little girl leaving. She's looking at things around her in her home, and then she leaves home and she's walking to school, and she's noticing the people with the gun in their belt on the street, and the people laying on the sidewalk asleep. She's noticing homeless people. She's noticing what people do at school, what her teacher's like, what the Puerto Rican speaker is like when he comes to the classroom and says, "¿Cómo están?" instead of "How are you?" and "Let's write some poems." And then she goes home and she notices what her drunk alcoholic father is doing, and he's saying, "Don't worry reading books, you're never going to get anywhere." And then her uncle is starting to notice what she's doing. And what she starts doing as a result of the Puerto Rican speaker's appearance, she starts writing her poems. She starts sitting down at the kitchen table and using words. And her father at some point says, "Are you doing your homework?" And she says, "No, I finished that, I'm writing some poems." And he says, And as time goes on, he starts to realize that she is empowering the family by writing her poetry. So I very much recommend. Children's books are wonderful for adults too. There is no way I can describe to you all of the wonderful things that Luis Rodrigues is doing for us, even at his young age. But let's hear it from himself. So a hearty welcome, please, for Luis Rodrigues.
Thank you very much. A very beautiful introduction. For the longest time I was trying to figure out who's she talking about, you know. But I really appreciate that. And then you reminded me about that plane trip I took to Berkeley when I was 18 years old. That was the first plane trip I ever took when I won this prize. And here's the funny thing about these heavy-duty, hardcore gangbangers sometimes. They're scared of planes, man. I was scared to death. I mean, I was like, you know, here I've been shot at. I've had, you know, razor blades to my neck. But I'm like, I couldn't stand it, you know, so. But anyway, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be back. It's been a long time, and I want us to have a very strong, good conversation about the issues that we need to discuss as community, about youth, about what are we going to do with the trouble in our communities, and maybe some imaginative ways of dealing with it. Because to me, that's really what I would like to do. My purpose is to move the imagination about some of these issues that we have a hard time dealing with, such as gangs and drugs and prisons. There's a real deep lack of imagination when we talk about these issues. So I think we have to really be more imaginative and open up to new ideas and other ideas and see how we can explore some of these issues that are important for all of us. And I thought what I would do is just read a little bit of a couple of poems, not even by me, because I want to kind of have some poems come out. And this is from my book, which I'll be speaking more from, Hearts and Hands, Creating Community in Violent Times. It's actually a compliment to Always Running. These are the two nonfiction books I've written. They're both based on real things, real events. This being a memoir of my life when I was young, but this being a summary of like 20, 25 years of work I've done with youth, with homeless people, with migrant families, but also particularly since the book has been out, because in the 12 years the book has been out, I've actually done so much working with youth. It wasn't enough for me to write about what we got to do about youth. I also had to do something myself. And so I created a number of organizations in Chicago as well as now in LA to address this issue. One of the organizations I started was called Youth Struggling for Survival, which I talk about in the book. And just recently I heard that they've opened up a new school in the big Mexican barrio there. There's two main neighborhoods that the Mexicans live in. One's called Pilsen and one's called Little Village. And combined, they're the second largest barrio outside of East LA. And they don't have enough schools, as people know. The schools are overcrowded. They have metal detectors in the schools. All the problems that we're seeing, high dropout rates. Well, the parents went on a hunger strike because they were going to deny them a school in Little Village. The school that they have now in Little Village is considered the most violent school in Chicago. And that says a lot, because Chicago's got a lot of issues and there's a lot of violence, and this was like the most violent. And they needed another school, and they weren't going to give it to them, so they had a hunger strike. If you can imagine, parents, mothers. And it got to the point where people started organizing, protecting them and protesting, and they got to the point where they actually got the money to have a new school. So they will have a new school next year, and it doesn't have a name, but it'll be a social justice school, if you can imagine. I was telling somebody earlier about this. And this youth group I started, Youth Struggling for Survival, is going to be the non-for-profit collaborative group that will work with them in the school. So in other words, things have really moved up for this group, which I'm really proud to have happen. Let me just read you a few poems by various people that I've quoted here in the book. And again, just to add some poetry, to have some sacred space, to have language in the room. I'm going to start with, these are all like some of my favorite poets. William Stafford is one of my favorites. Part Native American, who, even though he's probably mostly not Native American, he has always written from a very native, indigenous way of feeling and thinking. And this is part of a longer poem. For it is important, excuse me, for it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. And then from Pablo Neruda, who happens to be my favorite poet of all time. Out of each dead child sprouts a gun with eyes. And out of each crime, bullets are born that someday will find a place in your hearts. I'm going to read that again. I mean, when I read this, it's like he's speaking to my neighborhood. He's speaking to what we're dealing with. Out of each dead child sprouts a gun with eyes. And out of each crime, bullets are born that someday will find a place in your hearts. Just maybe a couple more. From Zora Neale Hurston. There is something about poverty that smells like death. Dead dreams dropping off the heart like leaves in dry season and rotting around the feet. Impulses smothered too long in the fetid air of underground caves. The soul lives in sickly air. People can be slave ships in shoes. Powerful imagery. And then just one more, so that the poetry kind of hangs with us for a little while. And then we can talk about some of these issues. Octavio Paz, another great master poet. With no name, no face, the death I want bears my name. It has my face. It is my mirror and it is my shadow. The soundless voice that speaks my name. The ear that listens when I am silent. The intangible wall that blocks my way. The floor that suddenly opens. So I thought I would share some poems just to open up a few things. And I want to start by letting you know about an experience I had just yesterday. I go to a lot of juvenile facilities, and I was fortunate yesterday to go to the Santa Clara Juvenile Hall as well as San Mateo Juvenile Hall, and able to speak to a group of young men and women. The first two groups were in the maximum security section. These were young men who had killed people. And then this next group was larger than the main group. I think everybody from the San Mateo Juvenile facility was brought into this big, huge room, including the women. And I just, every time I go in places like this, it's sad. It tears me up, but I know that I have to be strong. And I know that these young men and women are looking for, where is a voice, a story that I can hang on to, that can help lead me through where I have to go, that can help point the way. Where is the language that can take me home? And so I have to be very careful to say things that I know will be truthful to them, but at the same time give them hope, keep them dreaming. And it's very hard when they're 16 years old and they're facing life sentences. It's very hard when they're looking at 50, 60, 70 years of their life behind bars. And still, you have to do it. And you know what? Those kids were so hungry and so respectful. They just were open to have me say anything. And they had their books. And one kid came and had his journal. And this kid is facing, I think I understand, I may be wrong, 25 years to life. And he has his journal of all his poems. And he wanted to make sure that he would read some of his poems to us. And to me, it was extremely moving. And if you look at this kid, he looks just like all the young people in here. These kids, they don't look any different. They don't look any different than any of you. They look like my kids. And people in this world and in our society have written them off. People in this world have already determined they are no good. They are not human beings. They don't deserve resources. They don't deserve contemplation. They don't deserve jobs. They don't deserve anything but the worst society can give them. People have already determined that these are not worthwhile people. Oh, yeah, thanks. And thank you. And that really gets me pissed off, you know. And it's like we keep, how do you say, we keep kind of pushing off people. We don't make room for everybody. And it's really about the scarcity that we assume is in our world, and a scarcity that many of us believe that only so many people can make it. And therefore we have a whole industry that works with those that can't. You know what I'm saying? We put billions and billions of dollars just to get people away from us. If you're going to put billions and billions of dollars in anywhere, it should get them to be alive, to be whole, to be healthy. We put money to destroy. We have so much money. We don't just put it to build and create and you know, make something happen. We also put it to destroy, close off. And this is what I see happening with our youth. And so I have to talk about that. You can't have a community unless you have the proper attention and the proper healthy ways of dealing with these issues with young people. Unless we center ourselves on the needs of our children and on our youth. And this is not to say, like my wife one day, what about the elders and the older people? Don't they need support? It's not this is not scarcity. This is about abundance. If you take care of young people, it actually takes care of the older people. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't take away from older people. In fact, I have become so blessed by being among these young people. You know, them and working with them have given me life, have given me hope, have saved my butt. You know what I mean? I think I'm trying to save kids. They're saving me. And so I think that it's important for us to see the importance of community being centered around our youth again. We've lost this. Sure, our youth are being entertained. We have a whole industry that gives young people video games and movies and music and you know, whatever money they can get from them. But it doesn't give them life. It doesn't give them a sense of purpose. Their spirit, for the most part, drained. And you know, poverty, people say, well, what about gangs? And nobody seems to have an answer to gangs. Well, you can figure out gangs. It isn't hard to figure out. Gangs occur within certain conditions. You look at those conditions and you'll find when there's gangs. And when those conditions don't exist, you're not going to have gangs. It isn't hard to figure that out, but nobody wants to look there. They want to blame the gang kids. They want to blame the parents. They want to blame everything. They don't want to look at what it is that we're doing. Poverty is one of the key elements in the street gang phenomena. It doesn't mean that rich people don't have gangs, but they don't call them gangs. They have them. It just means that the situation you're looking in the streets, where young people do drive-bys, kill their own people just like them, who are caught in that same world where they have enemies that they don't know, but you know what? Love the same things they love the same music. A world in which we start being suicidal, homicidal. See what I'm saying? You see what poverty is in that world. And people forget, because I've heard people on the radio, here's something you might be aware of, or you may not be aware of, but I actually might be on the Bill O'Reilly show. They invited me to be on the show. And people told me, don't go there. And I think, why not? I'll take the challenge. I mean, why not? But I think that I'm very much going to try to make sure that I stay on point because he likes to take you off point. But one of the most important things that I think is important to point out is that there is a rational basis for all the trouble we're going through. And if we look very deeply, we will find the root causes. Everybody is like Henry Walt David Thoreau once said, people are all hacking away the branches, but nobody's working at the root. That's what we're doing when we put more prisons, more police, suppression programs, zero tolerance, standardized testing, all these things. It's just the superficial. And we're abandoning the real work that has to be done at the root level. The real economy in our communities, the real politics of our communities, the real spirit that's missing in our communities. We don't want to do that work. And then we're putting up our hands. I don't know why people are in gangs. I don't know why people use drugs. So we have to get back to these things. And if you look at it deep enough, you will know that people join gangs for very rational reasons. I know when I say that, they can't believe it. Because they look at gang members as crazy. I know, it's la vida loca. It was a crazy life. And there's a certain kind of madness in there that has to be addressed. But I'm going to read you one quick statement by one of my favorite poets, Theodore Rodrigues, who when I heard this statement, I go, he's talking about what I'm saying. He's talking about the madness that I'm talking about. It's not quite madness like they're totally dead and off the wall. This is the madness I'm saying. It's a line from one of his great poems, and it goes like this. What is madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance? What is madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance? It's another way of looking at what we call the madness in our streets. The spirits of the youth that cannot reconcile with the kind of society that abandons them, that doesn't pay them proper respect and attention, that doesn't even care about their destinies, their purposes, their talents, their gifts. It's driving our kids mad. Our parents, the good parents, who don't got time to deal with these kids. A society that's so quick and fast, we can't slow down, just to slow down and just pay attention. So we're contributing to a madness that cannot live because it's at odds with the circumstances around it. You know about ADD, right? Kids that can't focus. I know I got adult ADD. I'm convinced of it. I know I can't focus very long. But, you know, ADD is considered a chemical imbalance. And if you're diagnosed as ADD, which actually more and more kids are being diagnosed, and there's like whole schools where like the whole school practically is on ADD, you know. So what they do is they give you drugs, Ritalin, and then if you're depressed, they give you Prozac, and they got lithium, they got all these drugs. It's a chemical balance. That's their whole thing. Well, the reality of it, it's not a chemical imbalance, it's a life imbalance. You hear what I'm saying? But we don't want to change the life that they're in. We want to change their minds. We don't want to change the fact that there's 40 kids in the classroom and nobody can pay attention to these kids. We don't want to change the fact that they're going to 30 minutes to 40-minute classes, so there's no time to really learn anything, and they're going through this all day long. We don't want to change the fact that, you know, there's teachers, good teachers, who are just overwhelmed, and when they're being told that all you got to do is test these kids, that they're actually not being teachers. So we'd rather the kids take the drugs. Well, let's change the kids. Well, we won't change what's really causing the problem. We'll change the kids. They try to do this to I have a 16-year-old son. I have 3 sons and a daughter. And I'll talk about my oldest son in a minute, but my 60-year-old son, when he was like 5, 6, 7 years old, they said he was psychotic. I mean, this kid was all over the place. I'll give you an example. When my daughter graduated from high school, she actually graduated from Catholic school. And at the graduation, we did it in the church. And I was filming her with all her friends, and some little kid was climbing the wall of this church. And I was saying out loud, man, some of these parents, they can't take care of their own kids. I don't believe it. You know, some kid is climbing the wall. Well, it was my son. You know, he was, and I don't know, like, but he was that kind of a kid. Okay, he would literally climb walls. Well, they told my wife he's going to need Ritalin. And then I talked to her and said, no, I'm not going to give him Ritalin. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to change his circumstances. So I found out what the school was like. 40 kids in a classroom, in a bungalow, because there were so many kids that were getting bitten by spiders and bugs in this bungalow because it was like just hidden away in the back. Nobody was going to pay attention to him. He needed people to watch what he was doing. 40 kids wasn't going to work. And again, they weren't going to change the circumstances, so they're going to change them. I'm going, no. I finally got him in a native-focused school in Chicago. And there was a school that you had to have some native background. I do have native background. And sometimes people don't believe it, don't want it because I don't got no card. You know what I'm saying? But it's okay. just look at my face. You know what I mean? Just look at me. And then, well, these people were real beautiful, and they accepted him as a Tarahumara indigenous young man. And what happened is he got into this Native focus school. There was 15 kids in the classroom. The teachers were very attentive. And besides everything they had to teach him, like everybody else, they also took conscious recognition of his culture, of who he was. I tell you, in a year's time, I'm not lying to you, in a year's time, he was a very well-focused, well-determined A student. I'm telling you. Because it changed, something changed. And it wasn't his mind, it was the world that we was in. And partly, in the book, I mentioned that, we have to not just prepare our children for the world, we have to prepare a world for our children. And that's really what I'm saying. We have to prepare a different world for our kids. And to me, this is the seed of what is community. And why I wanted to bring in these kids in the juvenile facility, because to me, they're beautiful, wonderful human beings. They've done some terrible, terrible things. We shouldn't ignore what they've done. We shouldn't pretend that it wasn't serious. We should let them know the seriousness of their acts, but we should also, whatever we do, help them heal. Help them heal. Because all we're going to do is get them in a situation where they'll just do it again and again and again. If we don't do the work now, and they're young enough, what can happen? Not like an old guy like me, that nobody can change my mind. I'm such a big knucklehead now, But when you're young, you can do something. So that's what I wanted to convey to the staff and everybody. Work with these kids. They can heal. I don't care what terrible things they did. They know it's terrible. This is why they're here. And they know because they're suicidal. And we know because they sleep all day long and they're depressed. So help them so they can carry something that's very hard to carry. And when I wrote my book, Always Running, I had to carry what I did. And I had to learn how to do it because I used to do it with drugs, and I got off drugs, and then I drank for 20 years on top of it. So it was like drinking, drugs. I didn't know how to carry what I had done. And when I wrote the book, it actually healed me to the point where I could look at my life and look at how powerful the words can be, but also maybe how somebody else may be helped. And finally, as some of you already know, because I think I mentioned this before, I've sobered up, and so I've been sober now 12 years since in June. I'll be 12 years sober. And thank you. Thank you. But I want to mention 5 things that I think are important to find and look at in our youth and also the rest of our community. These are 5 things that I found in my life. I call them the 5 empties, the big, great 5 empties. If you have them in people's lives, you're going to have problems. This is what I'm saying. This decisions the kids make are rational, but also how we respond could be very well put together. Look at these 5 empties, different variations of these 5 empties. If your kids have them, they will be in trouble. Kids in gangs have variations of these 5 things. So I'm going to lay them out to you, and they're very simple. And I found them in my life because I assessed what I went through, what made me the way I was. Why would an 11-year-old kid join a gang? Why did I want to shoot people? Why did I not care about my parents? Why did I want to use heroin? You know what I'm saying? I had to think about why I wanted to die at such a young age. What motivated me? And I think I had 5 empties. And I look at some of the youth I work with, and I see they also have the 5 empties. So I'm going to share them with you. And then I want to share with you the 5 things that people need to do to get out of it. Okay, so, there's no special order, but, there's no, formula or math to this. Whatever, different variations of it in people's lives. The first one that's important to point out is I find that with a lot of these young people, kids on drugs, even adults, one of the big problems that they have is they feel rootless, R-O-O-T. They feel disconnected, not rooted to either culture or family or something deep, deep roots. They feel like they're floating in the world, rootless. And many times that you will put everything behind a barrio because you don't know who you are, you don't know where you came from, you don't know the history, you don't know the past, and you know what? The barrio becomes everything. The whole neighborhood becomes everything because there's nothing else that you can even look to and say, I got something deep, I got deep roots somewhere. Being rooted is important in our lives. And the funny thing about American culture, it's about uprooting you. And that's not just because it's about that. People get uprooted to come here. See what I'm saying? And then when they're here for a good reason, they want to come here for a good reason. But then we don't get rooted. And the history that you get is not proper roots, you know what I'm saying? It's an idealized version of what they say is history, and it's not right. Because a lot of things are missing in there. So just because somebody says, well, here's your roots, here's your country, you should learn this stuff, and it's all distorted, that's not going to help. You got to have real roots, and we don't know how to do it, because everybody's been uprooted and coming here, and now, and even the indigenous people were uprooted just so other people can come here. So we have a lot of feeling of not being rooted. The other thing that people have is they have a deep sense of being helpless. And being helpless is one of these things that if you have it, nothing helps. Nobody can help you. It isn't so much that you can't help yourself, nothing else can help you. And connected to this is a sense of being powerless. Powerless, not just personal power that's missing, but maybe even power in the community, political power, power to deal with the economy and poverty. I mean, when things get like, there's nothing you can do about it. You know how people say, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it's always going to be. You're powerless. I can't change nothing. And if they can't change nothing, why bother with it? And then if you feel, rootless and you feel helpless and powerless, you also start feeling hopeless. And when hopelessness comes in, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. You're going through all the struggle. There's no reason to do it. There's nothing good going to come out of it. You open the Pandora's box, but there is no hope flying around afterwards. It's all troubles. And so you feel hopeless. That's the end of it. But the thing that summarizes all of these, and when you have this, you're going to have the worst problem is, the worst empty is you feel meaningless. Meaning is totally gone out of your life. There's no meaning in life. Why bother? There's nothing there. The emptiness is so deep. People will fill it with a lot of drugs and alcohol. It's so deep. 5 empties that people carry around. And the bad thing about poverty hurts because it's hard to be poor. It's hard not to have food. It's hard not to get a job. It's hard not to be able to pay the rent. But the worst part is the poverty of spirit that comes along with it, where you don't even have any more spirit to continue. And then sometimes you just think, you have 2 kind of rages in the world. White rage, which is depressed, and red rage, which is lashing out. They're both connected, 2 sides of the same coin. You know what I'm saying? When you're totally depressed and you're inward and you don't feel anything, and kids that cut themselves just to feel. And then you got this red rage, the kids in the streets, the riots in L.A., kids shooting people, just exploding, blind, no direction, just hitting everything. So this is the 5 empties that you have to be aware of. If you have it in your life, you got to find a way to fill it truly and wholly, completely fill it. Because otherwise, you're going to fall into the same traps. The prisons, the alcohol, the drugs, suicides, the empty lives. My dad, he worked, he didn't go to jail, he was a good guy, quote unquote. Totally dispirited. Emotionless, couldn't even connect with people, could not even say, I love you. To the day he died, even when he was dying, you think, come on, Dad, say it now. I love you. Come on, you're dying. Your last chance. Couldn't even do it the day he died. I don't blame him. I know what makes people this way. You know what I mean? So what I want to share with you is the 5 things that I found were important to get through all this. And these are 5 things that I give as advice to other people. I have like 150 prisoners that write to me. Old homies from years ago who read my book are now writing to me. And I'll tell you a story about one guy. I have it in this book. I changed his name to Johnny. And he probably is the worst case that I have ever had to work with. I've worked with murderers. I've worked with rapists. I've worked with armed robbers. I've worked with a lot of people. All of them are pretty decent, by the way. All of them are, sometimes I trust them more than people who aren't in prison. But, it's another story. But I got a letter from this guy. He said he read my book, Always Running in the Prison. He says, my dad's in the book. Well, it turns out he's the son of one of my homeboys who got killed. My homeboy was killed by the police, and he was 3 years old when it happened. He remembers it somehow. I mean, a traumatic thing like that, he remembers that. And when he was 11 years old, his mom shot him up with heroin. When he was 18, he killed a cop. And apparently, they couldn't prove it, so he got away with it, but then he became a big extortionist. He would go to all the businesses in the neighborhood and, get money from them, otherwise he would blow up their business. He started to be doing some heavy-duty crimes. He got sent to prison for a lot of his crimes. He became active in one of the prison gangs here in California. He became a soldier for the prison gang. His cousin, who's a good friend of mine, says that he's known to have possibly killed, and I can't confirm this, a minimum of 15 people in the prison gang. He has tattoos from the tip of his forehead all the way to his feet. He has 60% of his body burned. In one of the prison riots, somebody put flammable liquid in his cell and threw a match and burned 60% of his body. This guy's been through hell and back. So he writes me a letter, and he says, I read your book. He's like 30 years old. I want to change my life. And this is a hard thing. He's like, oh, okay, buddy. I don't know. I mean, what you've done, you have to carry a lot of stuff here, man. But you know what? I thought I would do what I can. I don't know. I'm not in the business of saving people. I think people save themselves. But maybe I can guide, hope, experience, some knowledge that I might give that might help. So I told him about these 5 things. And it took him a few years because we stayed in correspondence, but he actually did all those 5 things. And believe it or not, he actually got out of prison. And we actually met. I came from Chicago all the way to LA, and he got out of prison, and I saw something in him. Now, this guy's a hard guy. You could see it. And the pictures I had of him before that he had sent, like there was no emotion in his eyes. But I also saw something different. There was feeling there. You know what I'm saying? He looked hard. Tattoos on his face, all these burns. You can see the scars, But his eyes were joyful. You know what I'm talking about? They were joyful. Something happened to him. And he went through these 5 things, and I'm going to share them with you. Because this is what I told him. First thing you do, it says, find your art. Whatever it is. It could be painting. It could be writing. That's my art. Could be, music. Could be teaching. That's an art. Could be carpentry. Could be mechanics. You know the difference between a carpenter that does it as an art and a carpenter does it like a job? You open those cupboards after a carpenter got through it and it falls apart. Well, that's the guy that's just a job. Doesn't quite get it. But the carpenters and the teachers who do it because they love it. It's a calling. It's something. It's not just a job. I love teachers. Teachers are like my best friends when it comes to my book. They get the book out everywhere. But I have to say that some teachers aren't interested in the kids. It's just the fact of life. I've been to schools where when the bell rings, the first ones out the door are the teachers, And again, and not to blame them, I don't blame them. They're not working in good situations. But the thing is here, I told him, find an art. And it turns out his art is writing. He's a great writer. Because I'm going to read you one of his passages. And then I told him, the next thing you got to do is get help. You're never too proud to get help. Find it. Go for it. Anybody that can help you, man. People tried to help me, and I tell them to drop dead. For 2 years, I would tell them until they wouldn't give up. The 1 or 2 that didn't give up on me finally convinced me I needed them. And if they had given up on me, I would have gave up too. But, they actually stuck around to the bitter end. So I told them, get help, whatever you do. And then the next thing I told them is, okay, you get art, you get help, is what you need to find a cause. What are you here to do? You have these talents, you have these gifts. Something better than you, something bigger than you. You know what I mean? A cause in your community, a cause in your family, in your church, whatever it might be. 30 years ago, it was the movimiento that saved my ass. It was the movement that gave me purpose. It was that thing that I could sit down and learn about other people and put my talents in some direction that was actually going to be meaningful, that was actually going to change something. We don't have any more causes anymore, barely. You know what I'm saying? There's hardly any causes up there. Nobody's grabbing onto nothing. And I will tell you honestly, East LA, which is known as having more gangs than any other community in the country, in the 60s when the people were out in the streets and they were marching, they were walking out of schools, there wasn't hardly any gang violence. And as soon as all those movimentos were crushed, put down, whatever it was, the gangs came back and stronger than they did before. So you have to have a cause. The next thing you have to do is you have to have a spiritual life. This is important because nobody wants to talk about that. They don't want to talk about how engaged you have to be with spirit and meaning and purpose that tied into it. And I'm not necessarily talking about church, you know what I'm saying? Unfortunately, there are churches who have no spirit. That's just truth. I think spirituality, though, can come from churches. It can. But I'm talking about something deeper and bigger. And being spiritually engaged should happen in our schools, should happen in our communities, and you don't have to have, it doesn't have to change the separation between state and church either. You know what I mean? I'm talking about spirit that's more imaginative, more bigger, and when you deal with kids and their art and their creativity and purpose, you will deal with that spirit. All kids, including gang kids, are on a spiritual quest. I know this for a fact. So we need to have them spiritually engaged. And then the last thing, and this was a hard thing for me to do, and I think it was going to be really hard for him, it was I told him, whatever you do, own your life. That's hard for people like us, who had turned our life over to the barrio, to drugs, to heroin, or like him, he had done to the prison gang. He never had his own life. He was a soldier for other people, did what other people asked him to do. And I know that's the hardest one because it was hard for me. Because to get out of the gang life when I turned everything over, you don't just turn over part of it, everything. You didn't have time for your mothers. You have that saying, perdóname madre por mi vida loca. I'm sorry, Mom, for the crazy life. I love you, but this is it. I can't stop, won't stop. You know, and you're caught in the web of la vida loca. You're a spider in that web. And you're not a fly in the web, you're a spider, so you yourself are weaving yourself deeper and deeper into it. And so alcohol and drugs does the same thing. And when I got out of the gang, I kept on going to drugs. I finally got out of drugs. I turned it over to alcohol. There was always something else that I was giving myself to, and I never owned my life. And it's powerful to finally have that responsibility of saying, this is my life, I own it. And maybe I can do something good with it. And you know what, believe it or not, this kid, he took all those things and he started to do something with it. He became a writer. I didn't tell him what kind of spiritual life he had to find. He found a Buddhist in the prison. And this guy mentored him, and this guy became a Buddhist. Can you imagine this guy in meditation? I mean, can you imagine? But he became a Buddhist. He found his art. He found help. He found his spiritual path. He found a cause, and he ended up finally leaving the prison gang, which was at his detriment. His life was on the line. When I moved to LA about 5 years ago from Chicago, I was looking forward to hooking up with him. And then I get a message from his cousin. He says, he's not going to be there. He had to leave the country because his life, by him trying to own his life, the prison gang was after him. He knew too much, and he had to leave the country. He says he doesn't want you to know where he's going because he doesn't want you involved, doesn't want nobody to hit you up or nothing, but he just wants to say thank you. But he's gone. He will never come back, but he knows he's going to be okay. And you know, I believe he is. I don't know where he's at, but you know, I think he's going to be okay. And I wanted to, I don't know if I'll find it, I wanted to find this piece that he wrote because so you get an idea about what I mean, what a great writer he is, but if I don't find that's okay. I think the idea that you get is that if you can help somebody like him, I'm telling you, man, you can help anybody. And we write off too many people too soon. So it's important that we remember these things. And it's important that we remember how a community, cohesive, caring, cooperative, is the basis for making sure that young people get centered, get whole, and healthy. And I want to end with a poem, and then I want to hear from you. Like, again, I could talk. Somebody's got to shut me up. I was shy, but now I'm, like, completely unable to talk. I do want to end with a poem, and then I want to open up to you. And this is the poem that I wrote. It's my sobriety poem. I have a poem called Notes of a Bald Cricket. 7 pages. I'm not going to read all the 7 pages. I'm not going to read the last part. But I wrote it because it was my recovery. And it's called Notes of a Bald Cricket because when I was a kid, my dad had named all of my siblings after insects or animals. So my brother was El Rano for La Rana, the frog. I had a sister called La Pata, the duck. My other sister was La Cucaracha. You know what that is. And then I was known as El Grillo, the cricket. Because apparently when I was just barely learning how to walk, I had a little jump in my step. I don't know why. So he says, he's a cricket. And then in the summer, because of the lice in South Central LA, a lot of the people would just cut your hair all summer long because you have to worry about lice. So I became a grillo pelón, the broad cricket. So this is what this is. And I'll just read you the last part. And you might have heard this before, but when you hear poetry, it's important to not try to get the whole thing. Poetry is condensed language. There's a lot of images and details. You're not going to get it all. Poetry is meant to be read over and over again, and it's meant to be heard over and over again. So what you do is just let a detail or an image or 2 or 3 of them come get you and hang on to it. Next time you hear this poem, maybe another one come get you. That we don't know, we need to educate ourselves on how to read poetry. People have lost this idea of how to read poetry. Poetry is not like TV that happens so fast. It's not like the billboards that tries to sell you something. It's not like video games because that's fast and quick. And poetry is meant to slow down, you pay attention, get your ADD in check, right? And you let the poems come get you. And it centers us. And I'm going to read you this poem. It'll center everybody. You can close your eyes if you want or whatever, just so you can let the poem come in. And it goes in many directions. I'm not even going to explain it. I'm just going to read it. It goes like this. Wading through a lush of memory, through speechless seconds, seeing myself with the backhand of past lives, crumbling emotions surround me as this obsessive and irresponsible poetry man beckons to write, to tell truth. Oh, such a liar. I'm just a sleeveless jacket in a closet of worn clothes. I'm the incision of scarring verbs across the faces of all my loves. This Mexican who is a stranger in Mexico. This Pocho who hates milk with his coffee, juice with his vodka, who speaks English with an East LA accent and Spanish with an East LA accent. This Tarahumara's lost son. This gravel tongue. This ghost beneath every ruin, rising like jaguar's breath in a tropical storm. All sacrifices reside in me, all jagged chests, all virgin hosts, all warrior princes, all Malinches and Guatemocs residing in my lungs, filled with this wreckage of 2 massive oceans, all bloods commingling. I am Cortez's thigh, I am the African beard, I am the long coarse hair of Chichimeca's skulls. I am Chicano poet, a musician who can't play music as a musician is a poet who works in another language. There is a mixed ecology of brews within me. I've tasted them all, still fermenting as grass-high anxieties. I am rebel's pen, rebel's son, father of revolution and verse. I am capitalism's angry Christ, Techno-Quetzalcoatl, toppling the temples of modern thievery, of surplus value and word art, anointed, exploited, and perhaps double-jointed. There's a brown goddess in my eye, a Guadalupana for the broken red earth. The sacred is too sacred for wild cathedrals, for incest and Baroque martyrs and vested garbs, for pulpit schemers and sweat lodge fakers and garbled spiritualists on the best-selling list. I am disciple and elder. I am rockero and hip-hop bandit, rapping Aslanes in between brick-line texts. What do I know? What blazing knowledge can I spear? Who can burn with me and not get burned? Violence used to be great solace. Alcohol, my faithful collaborator, scratching dank words from stale corners. Now there are whole cities in my gardens. A stack of drums pulsing from my temples, saxophone riffs streaming from the sky like a waterfall into the canyons of my body. Walls carry my name, walls and their luminant fractures. Walk with me then. Walk with me to the Maya. Walk with me along headstones of past loves, past plans, long gone junctures. Walk with me to the forest of collective remembering, shamed and honored by the trees. I'm no immigrant. I belong because I belong. I'm no shaggy stranger. I'm the holy villain, the all-lost saint, the most godless and therefore dearest to the mystery. Where suicide is not solution, where poems no longer puncture the phantoms, and where walking with me is to become brethren to rain and night sweats and the betrayed. I hope we've inspired some questions and comments, and we'll go as long as we can before they bring the staff and pull me out of here. But Let's see if we can get some comments and just have a little dialogue, conversation about these issues, and talk to us. There's Mike, I guess, so that we can all hear you. If people can come up, we'd appreciate it. Anybody want to start?
Start.
Yeah. Okay.
Is this on? Anybody hear me? Okay. How's that? When we lose a civil rights freedom fighter, it hits me harder each time because I feel we're moving further and away from the civil rights legacy. Can you reflect on the passing of Corky Gonzales?
Yeah, very, very important. I never met Corky. I didn't have to meet him to know who he was. And he influenced a whole generation and more of young Vato Locos like me. And I'll tell you, the poem, I Am Joaquin, was so vitally necessary. And I almost had passages of it memorized, and I would read it all the time. It spoke about who I was, where I was going, my confusions, my certainties. It spoke to our struggle. It spoke to our people. It gave Chicano a name and a meaning and something that was, you can hold to, tangible, something real. And Corky was one of those guys who never stopped fighting. He was a boxer, but not only that, he fought. He started the Crusade for Justice in Denver. He was in all the major marches. He marched with Cesar Chavez. He marched with Martin Luther King. He went to the Chicano moratorium against the Vietnam War. He was in all the struggles. He opened up schools for our gente, schools about our culture and our history and our poetry and our literature, so that the people wouldn't have to worry about the schools that aren't going to do that. He made things happen. And he encouraged me years later to do the same, because now I have a cafe, bookstore, a culture center in the San Fernando Valley called Tia Chuch's Café Cultural, that hopefully my daughter wants us to build a school there too. So hopefully someday we'll get that, because she's a teacher. She says, I want to build a school for our people and our with our connections, our history, and for our kids. So I think that he's the light that helped do that, because he wasn't going to sit around and just wait for something to happen. He was going to make it happen. He did pass away, was it Tuesday? Yeah. And it's just really shame. And of course, my understanding is that he wanted to die at home. He was very sick, and they were keeping him in the hospital. He says, no, I'm gonna go home. I wanna pass away with my family. So he did pass away. And I know some of you may not even know who he is, which is really the sad thing, that he's not known by all of you, because he is a heroic, important figure. And hopefully we can now tell his story to a lot of people. In my magazine, I have an online magazine called Chispas, Xispas. If you get there, chispas.com, we have a tribute to him, and hopefully we can add some more to his legacy. So thank you about that.
Can you recite some of your songs?
No, I can't. I don't remember no more. I used to, but no, I have. Now I just can barely remember my poetry, so it's hard for me to remember.
Came out in what, 1967?
Probably 65, 67, yeah.
I just had a thought, and when you were talking about the gangs, how would you relate what's happened to our children to what's happened to us on a global scale, in terms of the war we're having in Iran,
Global scale, yeah.
What's happening in South America? I think there's like a parallel between what's really happened to our kids,
Right.
on a bigger scale, what's happened globally.
Well, yeah, and there's two ways to deal with that. I mean, one is the fact that we're actually created in our country a globalization of the gangs in the United States, as you know. And I wrote an editorial in the New York Times about 2 or 3 Mondays ago, about the fact that, they arrested all these Mara Salvatrucha guys, MS-13 all over the country. And they're an LA gang that got deported, like 18th Street and a lot of LA gangs, to Central America. And they recruited and built themselves up in Central America, and now a lot of those guys are coming back. Well, the Homeland Security considers them a major threat. They almost liken them to Al-Qaeda. They call their gang, instead of, whatever, they say they have cells. It's like all of a sudden they're using this terrorist language. Well, my editorial was, we created these kids. We created them because we supported that war in El Salvador and in Guatemala that brought 2 million and more people to this country as refugees. We created them because then they didn't have nothing here, no jobs, no resources, and many of them had to join gangs just to survive. And then, in '92, after the LA riots, instead of building and getting what the kids needed and helping out. They deported 30 to 40,000 kids a year to Mexico and Central America. And these were kids now with tattoos, sophisticated. Some had done prison time. They were going to countries that never had this. You know what I'm saying? Mara Salvatrucha didn't come from El Salvador. El Salvador did not have those kind of gangs. They had maras. Those were little guys hanging on the corner. Mexico didn't have these kind of things. Now they have them. And for the first time, they had crack. El Salvador didn't even have crack. Now there's crack all over El Salvador. Mexico City, there's crack everywhere. There never used to be crack. In Mexico City, LA gang guys are running the drug trade. We deport the problem, and now there's a globalization, and we're going to look at it like, oh, we're going to... See, the same policy that created these is the same policy that created Al-Qaeda. That's the problem that we won't take responsibility for. See what I'm saying? And nobody wants to talk about this, but we have got to take responsibility. We created the monster that killed those people. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Osama bin Laden. If they were catch that guy, good. But don't take away the fact that we made that guy. And Saddam Hussein and all those people that now we're supposed to be at war. And the other thing that I would say is that what really gets to me is that we're trying to tell these kids, don't think like a gang member, right? The gang mentality, you got to think differently. Don't think about the revenge and you're going to get this and all this kind of stuff. And guess who does it more than anybody? Right. Our leaders, our government, the people that's supposed to run everything. When 9/11 happened, terrible, terrible incident that was, I saw the seeds of reconciliation. I saw the seeds of people talking about healing. I saw the possibility that we could all sit down at the table and say, what kind of world can we change this from? But instead, what they did is wrap themselves around the American flag, got the bombs, put billions and billions of dollars in there, got our kids and sent them over there and just blew away 2 countries. We went nuts. We went crazy. We've killed far more citizens than ever was killed in that Twin Towers thing. And who knows, they don't even get the numbers. They're saying from 10,000 to 100,000 civilians in Iraq alone have been killed since we've been there. Nobody can justify that to me. And even Bush can't justify it because now it turns out there was no justification. See what I'm saying? But the worst part is the same gang mentality. We're going to get these guys. They're our enemies. They deserve to die. What is it when you do that shock and awe and you have those bombs and nobody has to really be there? They just have to, in computers. What's that? Those are great drive-bys. You know what I'm saying? They are. They're great drive-bys. So I'm glad you brought that up. And again, I'm not trying to justify the drive-bys that happens in our streets. It's not right that our kids are killing themselves. It's not. We don't want our kids killing themselves. But it's very hard to give them one message when our own leaders do the damn same thing. That's what's really difficult. ¿Quién más? Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You said you were going to talk about your oldest son. I was just curious how.
Good. Thanks for reminding me. I went to see him last week. I went to Chicago, and I wanted to say something about him because a lot of people know that I've written about the book for him. And no, it was very hard. He was in the gang in Chicago. I wrote the book to try to help him, so I didn't want to see him going through what I went through because he wasn't going to survive it. I just knew it. And sure enough, as some of you already know, he did not survive it. Some of you know he, at age 21, he got involved in 3 shootings, attempted murder, including against 2 police officers, and was facing 40 years to life. And it really devastated us as a family and the community. We had to fight the life sentence. We weren't going to get him off because it wasn't going to be possible. But the life sentence wasn't right to him to spend his whole life. And so we actually got a lot of support. We got letters from people all over the country. We had community members show up at the court, and we finally, after a year and a half, convinced this judge to give him a lesser sentence. The prosecution didn't want to do this. They didn't want no plea bargain. They were going to get him 40 years to life. They gave him a $2.5 million bail, so we couldn't even bail him out. But the judge, who was supposed to be a hanging judge, we convinced him. We gave him all these letters. I had a study made on his life so that people know what he went through, including an indictment against me. You know what I'm saying? Because I can't not be responsible for what happened to my son. I helped get him there. My neglect, the drinking, all the stuff when he was a kid, you know what I'm saying? And I couldn't remove myself. It says, put me in there. If I'm responsible, I'll take it. Because we have to look at what we create with these kids. And sure, I changed my life, which is good, you know. But I still can't help thinking how much I contributed to turning those prison keys on his life. Well, the judge, believe it or not, gave him a break. But the minimum that he could give him was 28 years. And so we had to accept in September 1998 a 28-year conviction and sentence, which he's serving right now in the state of Illinois. And I saw him last week. And I just want to say, you know, because he's trying to do the best he can in prison. It's a very difficult thing for anybody to do. And I really am proud of him, believe it or not. He actually got 2 AA degrees in prison. He got 3 certificates. I mean, it's all limited, like it's all in horticulture. But, you know, horticulture is actually pretty good in prison. It's actually very healing. And, I mean, in other words, he's not going to, they only limit so many things, but he got into it, and he became a teacher's aide. Now he's working with, the fastest growing group of prisoners in most of these states are Spanish-speaking. And so he's helping the Spanish-speaking with their language skills and everything else. And so I was glad to see him. He looked really strong, even though he's already done 8 years of his time. He looked strong, and we decided not to abandon him, and I think this is what really helped him. He left the gang life, and he's not having any problems with the prisoners. He's having problems with the guards, but the prisoners, they all seem to respect him. And I think that I'm really proud of my son, so I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
I just want to say thank you because you've been incredibly inspirational to me. And I wanted to ask you what you thought about the importance of mentorship and if there's anything that we can do for kids who so much has happened to them that it's really, really hard for them to forget and not give in to the depression and things that come with it. So,
yeah, I think mentorship is extremely important. It's not the same as parenting. It's not the same as even being a teacher, though it's related. And there's 2 things about mentors that we sometimes forget. One is you have to really care about the kid, but more so, you have to really care about his talent. You know what I'm saying? What makes you a good mentor is that you have knowledge and skills that will help draw out the beauty and art and talents of these kids. So you have to do one thing is, care for him and her, and second of all, give him knowledge, impart knowledge. People forget that part. So it's not just simply taking a kid to the mountains like, Big Brothers, which is nice, taking the mountains, having a nice relationship with the kid. It's teaching them things. And generally, I mentor kids who love words and language like I do. Because then they look at me and say, you know what, he's doing what I want to do. I want to be where he's at. So then I can be the guide to help him get there. So I think mentoring is vital, and here's the sad thing about it. Most kids do not have any meaningful, respectful relationship with any adult, let alone a mentor. And I would tell you want to stop gang violence in our streets? You want to stop it? I'll tell you one thing that really works. If every adult had only one young person, just one, that they mentored, you know what I'm saying? Just one, we would not have the problems we're seeing in our communities. So thank you. Mentoring is very vital.
Thank you.
Important. Thank you.
I'm short. I was hearing you talk a lot about kind of the idea that we have been focusing on the symptoms rather than the problems, and that's not getting us anywhere. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And what I think a big problem is the fear of the other. And it's something that I struggle with, daily. So I was wondering how you've been able to overcome that fear in your own life, and if you have any words of wisdom for us as to how to overcome that fear ourselves so that we can work on getting to the problem.
We fear of other people that are not like us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you one story that I think is apropos. Growing up, because I didn't really have much connection and my experiences were very limited, I hated white people. I'm just being honest with you. I hated white people. But I think it was because of the fact that we were very isolated And our experiences were whites in the barrio was basically either police, who were very, for the most part, brutal, very like a gang themselves, social workers, or maybe teachers who weren't necessarily on our side. I had the bad impression of what white people thought about us. But you know, you grow up, you mature, you begin to realize, first of all, that hatred eats at you. Hatred is a poison that you take, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't really hurt other people as much as it eats inside of you. And I had to learn how to deal with that. But the other side of it is that, you know, nobody is a monolith. No group. And this is what I learned, that there was among white people, just like there is among Chicanos, just like among African Americans, Japanese Americans, decent human beings who can help. If you're looking for help, open your doors to anybody. Don't just pick the people you think are going to be there. I learned, for example, I'll give you a story that I have to tell now because I just remembered it not too long ago, and it's very important. When I wanted to be a writer, as she was saying, I would take these classes at night. And I started at East LA College because it's nearby, and it didn't cost too much in those days. The tuition was very little bit for classes, and it was night classes. I wasn't trying to get a degree. I was just trying to get some learning. So I took journalism, creative writing, and speech, and some other stuff. Who knows? But I just kept trying to learn. Writing because I didn't know how to write. I wanted to be a writer. I don't know how to write. I dropped out of high school. When I went back, I didn't really learn that much. I was not a good writer. So I took a journalism class, and I walked in there, and there was a guy named Mr. Takagi, a Japanese-American guy. He had 15 kids in that classroom. Great. The next week, they were all gone but me. They all dropped the class. So then Mr. Takagi says, well, I have to drop this whole thing because I can't just teach you, he goes. And man, I must have had this terrible look of disappointment because the guy was like, oh, okay, well, he says, well, how about this? He goes, he really was, you know, I don't think he could stand to see my face. I don't know what it was. But he said, okay, tell you what, if you show up every week, I'll be here. And you know what? It was an amazing thing. I accepted it. I came in the next week, and you know, I was thinking, he's not going to be here. You know what? He was there, waiting. And for several weeks, I would come, and he'd be there. And he showed me about writing, did some chalkboard stuff, showed me some books, magazines, had me write stuff. I mean, the poor guy, I remember one time that he was so tired. One time I was reading my piece, and the guy was falling asleep. But I kept reading because I thought, you know what, man, this guy, he's doing a great thing. Maybe even if it has to do in his dreams, he's helping me. He's helping me. And you know, how do you find people like that? You know what I mean? I don't even think he even got paid. People who just, out of the goodness of their hearts, would open up the door. So I learned that you cannot judge people just because of the race, just because of what you think you might hate about them. You have to judge people by who they are, what they come through. And I've learned, and it was helpful. There is no monolith. And so this is the fear that I had to break away from working with white people and working with others who weren't Chicano. Because I was just all about Chicanos. I didn't care about anybody else, you know what I mean? And I began to realize other people were going to be there. And then, of course, the way the world goes, love breaks through all that. My 4 grandkids, one of them's half Mexican and half African-American, Puerto Rican. The other one's half Mexican, half German. The other one's half Mexican, half Hungarian. The other one's half Mexican, half Irish. I mean, what am I going to do? You know, I got to love my kids. I got to love, you know, I can't hate them. They're all beautiful. So then you just learn how to break that otherness and break that bond. I mean, not that bond, but the barrier that stops you. And I really think it's truly sad, and I don't know how we're going to handle it, that people are sitting on the border right now, militias, trying to stop people from coming over and willing to risk their lives and the lives of others, which I'm more concerned about, to maintain a border that's not even, it's a man-made madness. Human beings created this nonsense. It wasn't created by God. It wasn't created by nature. This is a human being thing. Why do we put so much behind it? Hear what I'm saying? You know, when I was a kid, they used to take us to school. We would see those maps with the political lines, all the states and the countries. I thought the world was actually made up like that. But then when you get those pictures from the Hubble telescope, what does the Earth look like? It don't look like these little maps. It looks like a beautiful green, blue, white planet that we all live in. There is no political lines. That's the God-given earth we should fight for. That is the global community we should fight for, instead of fighting for the stupid nonsense, some stupid line that somebody created, and we're going to kill people for it. It's time that we fight for that world and not for that stupid thing, because that's why I see happen to our kids. Kids fighting for turf they don't even own. For one street, that, the next street, their primos are living there, but it's the wrong street, they're their enemies too. And it's time that we change that nonsense. Thank you.
Great to listen to you. I understand you're among the top 100 most censored journalists. Could you speak to that?
Yeah.
And distribution as well.
Yeah. It's probably an honor, as was mentioned, to be so censored. But I don't really think it really is. I think it's a terrible thing that they're censoring these books. Any of these books. And why? How can you be in a land of the free and censor books? It doesn't make any sense. And yet it happens. 100 books being censored and more, but those are like the top 100 books. And these are amazing books they're censoring. You don't have to like the books, but we need to read them. Books are ideas. Books aren't going to kill nobody. Books will, it'll teach you something even about what's bad about the books. It'll teach you about that. So it's good to be able to read. And I think it's funny when kids aren't hardly reading, they're not picking up any book that they're going to censor my book. Sometimes this is the only book that some kids will read. So they don't want them to read nothing. That's education. And so I don't really think it's good that they're censoring. And it's really sad that I think it's happening in this area. And obviously it's something that we should struggle around. And again, it's not just about my book, any book. And I remember one time in San Jose when they tried to censor the book, I was on the radio, and somebody was asking me, well, you're just pushing your book. You're just trying to make yourself famous and well known. And you know what I told him? I says, you know what? I wish this book was completely obsolete. I wish nobody bought that book. I wish nobody cared about this book. I wish that nobody would relate to this goddamn book. You know what I'm saying? I wish that nobody would love it, care for it, because this is a book that shouldn't be happening in our communities. But it is happening, and this is why I wrote it. And as long as kids are going through this stuff, people got to write these kind of books. And if they're going to write these kind of books, make it accessible to them. Use it in the schools and let them learn and get them to write their own books, instead of trying to cut books and censorship. So anyway, I was really pissed off. I'm not trying to push my book. I really wish that someday this book would never have any more readers and nobody would never need a book like this.
But how many copies have it sold?
Oh, it sold 250,000 copies as of now. And it actually will come out in the fall with a new cover, a new introduction, and a new study guide. Because now the schools are using them, so they're going to put a study guide in there too. Some teachers got to hold it. I know we don't have a lot of time, so this is maybe even one or two more questions. Because I also want to sign books and and make sure that you go home safely.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a public school teacher, and I have discovered these are my babies over here.
Thank
your
you.
book is
Thank you.
probably one of the only books that I can get them to read. I'm hoping you can tell us about some other accessible books in this genre, and if you could give us a quick synopsis of your upcoming book.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, as far as other books, I don't know. There's a number of books. And again, young people know better than me because they'll find them. And it's word of mouth, you know what I'm saying? Somebody says, hey, this is a good book, man, And honestly, I think it's not even about the sex scenes. People think that's what it is. It's not. I mean, I think kids are more astute than that. It's adults that get pissed off and pushed out of shape because of the sex scenes. But I do think that it has a lot more to do with the kids can see the whole picture. And they know there's something being said that maybe they can relate to. I don't know too many other books. I mean, there's Monster Cody's book. I don't know if you've seen that one. There's a few other books that talk about just the gang life. But I know there's other books. And I think that helps kids even read books that have nothing to do with gangs. Once they know what literature can do, they can start reading other books that maybe opens up to some of them. I have a Romeo and Juliet story in my book. So maybe you never know. They might want to read Shakespeare, I'm going to tell you something. I never read Shakespeare. I never saw a Shakespeare play until I was 45 years old. And I was in Asheville, Oregon. Have anybody ever been up there? Is it Asheville or Ashland? That's what it is, Ashland. Yeah. And they have one of the best Shakespearean things going on. And I stayed in the home of the director for the whole Shakespeare play. So he got me into the first Shakespeare play I ever saw. And it was, I don't even remember it. It didn't really matter because when I heard it and I saw it staged, and you know, I didn't understand the language, but it was okay. I was in tears. I was in tears. And as a kid, I never could appreciate it. And nobody ever gave me Shakespeare. You know what I'm saying? And now, a 45-year-old man, I look at it and I can appreciate the beauty of the language and the story, and I go, you know what? It really brought me to tears. So I know that a book like this can maybe help think about other books. So thank you for that. What was the other question? Oh, the new book is called Music of the Mill. It's my first novel. It's about, I work in like that industry that we were saying. I worked 4 years in the steel mill, and I decided I got to write about this experience. Because as you know, a lot of that industry left our cities and communities. A lot of that contributed to the rise in gangs in this country. Nobody wants to make that connection. The two biggest gang cities in in the United States is LA and Chicago. They are the two largest manufacturing cities in the United States. And the Rust Belt, they all contributed to kids being no jobs, nothing to do, and then drugs coming in the 80s. You know, this is the funny thing about the war on drugs. Whenever we go to war on something, it actually makes things worse, right? We went to war on poverty, and poverty got worse. We started a war on drugs, and guess what? It got worse. In fact, there's drugs that didn't even exist before that's happened after the war on drugs. Crack never existed before the war on drugs. Crystal meth didn't exist before the war on drugs. There's a lot of other drugs. So what happened is that when the industry left in the late 70s and early 80s, in the 80s the war on drugs happened, guess what? Now drugs is in all our communities. And then the gangs never used to be drug gangs. People who in gangs know what I'm talking about, especially older guys. The gangs and drugs was two different things. But now they've combined. Our policies, our craziness have helped create the situation. So I wrote the book to try to, in a novelized form, to explain some of these issues of the industry, the families that depended on it. And then when the steel mill closed in LA, there was 10,000 families that were hungry. We had to feed them every week through the union. We had the largest food bank in the country out of that steel mill closing. Suicide went up. Alcoholism rates went 25% higher. It devastated communities, and then the gangs got bigger. So when that industry left, it actually contributed, and I wanted to write a book that can talk about some of these issues. So hopefully you'll get a chance to. I'll be reading in San Francisco, and I don't know if I got the exact date. I think it's May 13th, and I'm also going to read in Santa Cruz, and hopefully I can come back sometime later and read somewhere around here. Thank you.
I was just curious what you to say, about media depicting gangs and how it depicts it as being encouraging children to join gangs in some ways.
Yeah, the media. Well, you know, the media has to lie. I don't know why. I was in the media so long, and I actually was very saddened being in the media. And I actually worked for CNN years later in Chicago. I worked in the radio. When I got out of newspapers, I ended up working in radio. But I had to get out of there. I quit it too, because it was during the Persian Gulf War, and whenever the bombs were going off, remember, in the Persian Gulf War, all these reporters would jump up and, yay! I go, you know what, I don't want to work with these people, you know. And I don't know, except that, you know, we have to get the truth one way or the other. We have to stand for the truth. We have to stand for at least our truth. If the media is going to talk about gangs, they ought to talk to the real gang kids. They ought to talk to the former gang kids. They ought to talk to the kids going through it and the kids who've been through it. And they ought to listen to the experts in their own lives. They're the experts. The media isn't the experts. And the media is going to they're going to do two things. They're either going to glorify them or they're going to demonize them. Both those things distort the reality. The reality is neither one of those. So this is why we need the truth. And if the media won't do it, we got to create the media, or we got to find a way for our truth to be heard. Listen, I think I'm going to have to end, but I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you for participating. Please don't stop the struggle. Please center your life around these kids. Be real mentors, be real teachers, be real parents. Gracias. Thank you so much. Thank you.